Hi, welcome to the Conference of the Social Sciences at University of Florida. Today we have our second speaker. This is Dr. Russel-Brown. Dr. Russel-Brown is a professor of law and the director of the Center for Study of Race and Race Relations at the University of Florida, Levin College of Law. Dr. Russel-Brown researches, and writes on issues of race and crime and the sociology of law. I want to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Russel-Brown for speaking today. And I want to thank the student government at UF for sponsoring this great talk today and this opportunity to share some of this information for graduate students and undergraduate students as well. So on that note, I will turn it over to Dr. Russel-Brown, and thank you again.
Well, good morning to everyone. I'm excited about the invitation to speak with you this morning. Thank you to Cassidy Haig, who on behalf of the Florida Society of the Social Sciences invited me to be one of the speakers at this year's 15th annual Conference of Social Sciences. And also thanks to Janet Margot and to Carrie Beth Head for making sure all the technology works this morning and does what it's supposed to do. And it's also great to be on this program with Dr. Sewell. And thank you to each of you who are here to join with us this morning. So let's begin with commentary by two people whose writing I respect a great deal. And I'll share some of their words to help situate my talk this morning, which I've titled Justice Literacy, Building Your Sandbox. So the first comment is taken from a talk given by Ida B. Wells about the role of ensuring justice. Wells was an anti-lynching advocate and journalist. She was a truth teller, and she painstakingly gathered the horrific details on thousands of lynchings of Black Americans across the country. She wrote about and published this information in the Chicago Defender, a Black newspaper. And last year, Wells was posthumously awarded a Pulitzer Prize for her writing and anti-lynching advocacy. In her remarks in a 1909 talk before the National Negro Conference, which was a forerunner to the NAACP, Wells had this to say. She says, thousands of American citizens have been put to death and no president has yet raised his hand in effective protest. The only certain remedy is an appeal to law. Lawbreakers must be made to know that human life is sacred and that every citizen of this country is first a citizen of the United States, and secondly, a citizen of the state in which he belongs. Federal protection of American citizenship is the remedy for lynching. She's saying here that the law and law enforcement has to be on the right side of history, has to protect everyone. And in another part of the talk, she argues that the federal government should collect data and publish it on lynching. Okay, let's go to a statement by C. Wright Mills, who says, all social scientists, by fact of their existence, are involved in the struggle between enlightenment and obscurantism. Okay. To practice social science is first of all to practice the politics of truth. Now, together, these comments express what I hope are the underpinnings of my work, using data and research to enlighten and to tell the truth. Most of what I'll talk about this morning draws from my 3 decades-long journey in academia. My hope is that it offers broader themes that will resonate and challenge and perhaps inspire. So I went to law school right after graduating from college. And I went with the idea that I was going to help those who needed help the most, to advocate for those who needed advocates. And after graduating, I did a fellowship at the Southern Poverty Law Center in Montgomery, Alabama, which was a big change in the geography coming from California. And there, and some of you may be familiar with us, the Southern Poverty Law Center's work, did work on hate crimes and lynchings, most notably. And after my time there, I was offered a position to teach, and I decided I would give it a try. And so I had my first teaching position at Alabama State University, which is an HBCU, also in Montgomery. And I loved it. I was teaching in the Criminology and Criminal Justice program, and it was just a very good experience. I really enjoyed the work. But what I found out very soon, very quickly, was that I would not be able to get a permanent position teaching because I didn't have a PhD. And so even though I had a law degree, which would allow me to get tenure or at least be placed on the tenure track in a law school, I wasn't going to be able to do the same thing because I didn't have a PhD. So with some urging, I decided that I would go back to school yet again. Although when I was graduating from law school, I swore I would never, never walk across a stage on which I was graduating from school again. And I selected the University of Maryland, which had, had a well-known and highly respected graduate program in criminology. And when I started graduate school and during my doctoral studies, the US was roiling in race issues, particularly those tied to the criminal legal system. And so here I just kind of provide some of the headlines of the cases that were going on. There was the videotape beating, and this is in the late 80s, early 90s, videotape beating of Rodney King by the LAPD. The confirmation hearings to the US Supreme Court for Clarence Thomas, and then Anita Hill's testimony about sexual harassment by Clarence Thomas. The crack cocaine epidemic was raging across the nation. There was a hoax, a false claim of crime by Charles Stewart in Boston. He's the husband and was father-to-be who said that he and his wife, after leaving a birthing class, had been attacked by and assaulted and shot by a Black man. And his wife later died. And it turns out that Stewart had set up this elaborate hoax as an insurance ploy and had falsely claimed that they had been attacked by a Black man who was seeking to harm them. While this is going on as well, the Sentencing Project came out, a DC think tank came out with a bombshell report finding that 1 in 4 young Black men is on probation, on parole, in prison, or in jail. There was also the Tawana Brawley case involving a young Black woman who claimed that she had been sexually assaulted and kidnapped by a group of white men, one of whom she said was wearing a law enforcement badge. Mike Tyson was arrested for rape. The mayor of DC, Marion Barry, was arrested for smoking crack cocaine. And also during this relatively short time period, Spike Lee's movie, Do the Right Thing, came out. And this was a big deal because of the subject matter, and it deals with um, racial tensions. Because of the subject matter, some cities were saying that they didn't want to show the film, that they were going to call out the police to be on call after the movie was showing. So this was a big deal, and this kind of, really raised a lot of issues about media representations of race and crime. And so I share these to say, that there were a lot of stories about race and justice in the news at the time that I was in graduate school. And what I know now is that race issues, particularly issues of race and crime, are deeply, deeply embedded within the US political structure and system. And really that the criminalization of Blackness is part of this status quo, and that there's really no time in which we could point to when matters of race are not boiling over in the US. Okay. So when I think though about what was going on out in the world, and then I compare it with what was under discussion, what was part of the reading, what was part of the analysis and learning about how to do criminology, what was going on in my classroom related to these things was this. uh, next to nothing. Okay, there was barely a peep of a discussion about race or U.S. history, U.S. racial history in any of my classes. The assigned readings and discussions offered little opportunity to engage with historically rooted theoretical assessments that analyze Blacks' racially disproportionate engagement in the system. I remember in one of my courses, we read Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from Birmingham jail. That was it. That was pretty much it. And race, though, did show up in terms of statistical models. Race was always one of the independent variables included in studies determining offending rates and patterns, and was often the variable most likely to be a significant predictor of offending or victimization. So this yawning gap, this wide gap between how race showed up in the real world and how it was being framed in graduate school really sort of gnawed at me. And this silence moved me to investigate race and crime as an area of study. It also made crystal clear to me that a student in a criminology doctoral program should have to engage at some point in some way an academic study of race. Okay? And not doing so really strikes me as some kind of academic malpractice, some kind of ethical breach that students would graduate without or have their degrees without having wrestled with, engaged with in at least one of their courses, subjects related to race in the discipline of criminology. Okay. Well, as a junior professor, I staked out race as one of my areas of focus, including criminal law. And my first published article was called The Development of a Black Criminology and the Role of the Black Criminologist, where I argue for a criminology that centers Blackness. And in researching that piece, it led me to think about how Blackness is so often directly linked with criminality. And, we hear the terms Black on Black crime, Black criminality. So I decided I wanted to take a look at crime through a different racial lens. So I wrote a piece called White Crime. And in my research, I found that I only came across one other article that used the term white crime. And it was a piece that was written by renowned critical race theorist Richard Delgado. And the piece that I ended up writing really explored why we don't have comparable terms to describe crime and deviance engaged in by whites. So we don't have terms like white crime, or we don't use terms like white crime or white criminality or white on white crime or white offending. That's not, kind of part of our language of criminology. And I wanted to assess and consider what this absence of language meant. So I sent out the piece to some leading criminology journals, one at a time, and it was rejected by both of them. The rejection isn't what surprised me the most. It was the tone and dismissiveness of some of the anonymous peer reviewers, one of whom thought it was a waste of time to focus on white offending since Blacks have such high, disproportionate rates of offending. Another thought that white collar crime was covered, or thought that white crime was covered under the broader heading of white collar crime. Okay. So I decided to go ahead and send the piece to Professor Delgado to ask what he thought about the piece and if he had any suggestions on journals that might be open to publishing it. And he responded by sending a flyer announcing his new Critical America series that he was editing with Gene Stefanik with the New York University Press, and asked if I wanted to write a book for the series. And I immediately said yes. And so that's how I ended up writing my first book. I had previously had no plans to write a book. My discipline focuses on articles. And in fact, one of my colleagues told me, and this was, I had not been tenured at that point. One of my colleagues said, well, your book is only going to count as one article. I went ahead and wrote the book and focused on the topics and issues and questions that I had had as a graduate student. And I wrote the book that I wished had been available to me. And the book, The Color of Crime, okay, and this is the photo for the second edition, but the book includes a chapter on white crime. And I'm happy to say that the third edition of the book, and it came out in 1998, the third edition of the book will come out later this year. Okay. So in terms of creating my academic sandbox, my scholarship focuses on 4 interwoven themes. Okay. And I create this scholarship, or I write this scholarship under this broad heading of a justice literacy project. Okay, so my scholarship falls under this, and in terms of the themes, okay, hold on, let me see. I think did I not? Hold on, I'm looking for. Yeah, okay, here we go. So scholarship themes, there are 4. And so kind of these are some particular areas of my research. And so the first is a critique of the criminal legal system. And increasingly, this language is used as opposed to criminal justice system to reflect more accurately what the focus is, and to not presume that the system operates justly by using justice. So a critique of the criminal legal system, that's part of what I did and wrote about in my Black criminology piece, as well to identifying places or identifying harms without legal remedy. And one example of that in terms of my work is an investigation of racial hoaxes. And I mentioned earlier the Charles Stewart case. And as a result of that case and others, including the Tawana Brawley case, and have documented over 100 hoaxes, basically where someone falsely claims that a crime took place and then singles out or identifies someone, mostly a person of color, usually a person who's Black, and falsely says that they were victimized by this person. So we've had any number of these cases. But so this was an area I was looking at, because while a racial hoax is a false report, and we saw this most recently last summer with the incident involving a bird watcher and a dog dog walker clashing in Central Park, and it was a white woman and a Black man. The white woman is claiming falsely that, you know, she's facing imminent harm from this Black man who simply asked her to leash her dog. But so the point here is identifying harms without legal remedy as one theme in the scholarship. A third is examining racial frames. Okay. And that's how we talk about crime. So in discussing white crime, that's an example, like why are we using particular types of frames? And what does that mean when we use them? What does that signal? And then another theme of the work that I've done is to develop race and crime literacy. And the idea here is to identify terms, identify names of people, incidents, cases, legislation that a reasonably informed person on issues of crime and race would be familiar with. And so I have put together a list, and this is one of the chapters in The Color of Crime, of about 140 or so terms that would form, I'd say, the ABCs, if you will, of race and crime literacy. Okay. And so as I've noted, this forms what I consider, kind of the broad thematics of my justice literacy project, okay, as I've noted. And in terms of terms, as I was just making reference to and examining, relanguaging, here are some terms that I've come to employ and have been, adopted or used by others as well. One of those is criminal Black man, and it's 3 words pushed together. And this is to symbolize the ways in which we associate Blackness, maleness, and criminality so closely that it could be used as one word. And so I offered that term, I've offered up that term as a way to see it visually and to make reference to it. Okay. Racial hoaxes, another term as well that I just mentioned in terms of what it is. Black protectionism is another one. And here, this is a description of a process of how the Black community or writ large responds when someone African-American is accused or charged with engaging in criminal or wrong behavior. And then white crime, as I have already talked about, is my attempt, or offered as part of my attempt at relabeling. Okay. Now, the work that I have been doing, I've just gone over what the themes are, But in terms of what anchors this work, kind of more broadly, I wanted to share what those anchors are. Okay. And this justice literacy project that I'm working kind of under, and these anchors kind of encapsulate my scholarship themes. And so first, to investigate the racial gaze that's associated with crime. And in some ways, well, I'll say it a different way. I borrowed the conceptualization that is or has been interpreted, or rather has been used by Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, who's a professor emerita of education from Ohio State. And she's actually a children's book scholar, and she describes the work that children's books do and the gaze that books allow us to have. And so for investigating the racial gaze, she talks about, and I'm borrowing it for this context, but she talks about children's literature as offering a reflective and opportunity for reflectiveness and reflection. And so it offers this reflecting glass and allows us to see ourselves. And so this allows for, this fits as far as the work that I'm interested in, with having the work show what and who we are as social scientists, as criminologists, as academics. And so this scholarship focuses us to look inward and see ourselves. Another part of this conceptualization articulated by Dr. Sims Bishop, so beyond the mirror, is that literature, academic work, serves as a window, and that this window offers views of the world. Okay, and so I like to use the analogy of the mirror and the window as part and parcel of what's necessary to investigate the racial gaze associated with crime. So the second anchor is rethinking what's required knowledge for criminology. Just what does that amount to? Okay, and so in my work, as far as teaching classes on law courses on race and crime, really over the years has underscored how little students know about and have been taught about US history, uh, racial history in K through 12 education. Students often say, this is the first time I've heard about fill in the blank, whether it's, the slave codes, the black codes, black laws, sundown towns, redlining, lynchings. So these are not things that are being taught in any systematic way. So part of the work is thinking and rethinking what should be required knowledge, and this ties as well to the work on creating race and crime literacy. Okay. Third anchor, engaging across disciplines, across the social sciences, to art, to medicine, to education, thinking about ways to make linkages in the scholarship so that it incorporates work of other disciplines. And then 4 is writing for different non-academic, non-criminological audiences. And here I think of this as engaging in research translation. And that is, so written an article, done a poster, given a talk. What are some other ways to repackage that work for other audiences. So whether it's an op-ed, whether it is uh, a blog post, whatever it is that we can consider figuring out other ways uh, to to present our work to different audiences, because they're not necessarily going to be interested in or feel at home with reading some of the academic scholarship. And this reminds me of something that Black feminist scholar Bell Hooks said, and when she talked about intentionally not using footnotes in her writings because it would be off-putting to some members, including members of her family. It would be a footnote, or footnotes would be a signal that this is not for you. So this idea of research translation is important. And also in working, toward this kind of representing this fourth anchor, I've in recent years turned to writing books for young people, writing books for children. And the first children's story that I wrote was about a middle school girl whose mother was away in prison and had been gone for over a year, and who was going to return home soon. And the story was really about the girl's feelings about her mother, missing her mother, living with her grandparents, dealing with, preteenhood, and just kind of a slice of her life story. And I couldn't get anyone interested in publishing the story. The most common response was, it's too depressing. And I'm thinking, as I'm hearing these responses, well, but this story reflects the lived experience, the life being lived by about 3 million children in the US. But that was, that was not persuasive. But my goal in continuing to write for children has been to enhance the educational knowledge around race for young people, that there are so many stories with Black characters that need to be told, and they don't and shouldn't all be focused on enslavement and strife and fighting for rights. Okay, and so I wanted to add to this body of what's available for children's literature. We know the power of children's literature. We know how it creates early guideposts for young people. We can see this just this week with the fallout from Dr. Seuss's estate, right, withdrawing several books because of stereotypical images in those books of Asians and Africans. Okay, so I did write and get published, and here's my first children's book, Little Melba and Her Big Trombone. And that was the first one, but I have published two since then, one on Aretha Franklin and another on Shirley Chisholm, who was the first Black woman elected to Congress, and also first Black woman to run for president in 1972. Okay, so I've shared this overview of my justice literacy project with the hope that it has shown how I've tried to work across disciplines, particularly in law and history and education and sociology, and to engage my scholarship in the classroom with the goal of inviting others to do this work as well. So I want to pivot now to talk about what are some of the ways to take an active role in shaping the future of the social sciences and social justice. Okay, and so here are some areas for consideration. Okay. First, defining what social justice work or what social justice scholarship is. What will it look like? What which principles is it based upon? And so, for example, I looked through the subjects of the paper sessions for this conference, and it looks as though social justice can be defined through a variety of different, or used in a variety of different ways. So it could be on the examination of a particular practice. Okay, what is the impact of a particular practice on various communities? For example, on cash bail, on voter access legislation, on immigration laws, and how a particular law impacts a particular community or particular communities. Another way of framing social justice is to look to see which populations, or to expand, I should say, expand which populations are included in studies. Someone had was looking at marginalized communities with health rather disparities. So another inquiry, another way of framing what constitutes social justice work or social justice research is how the research question is framed, and how it may be designed to focus on issues of a particular community, on transgender rights, on bicultural Latinos, Latinas. So the framing of social work is key in figuring out how this work will be done. So in terms of shaping the future for social justice, a second is engaging in research translation. And I just spoke about that in terms of the anchors of my work. And I think that research translation is very important for a couple of reasons. First of all, because of the insularity of our academic work, that we're bound by disciplinary confines and frameworks and paradigms and theoretical approaches. And this makes it largely inaccessible, our work, in part because of how it's written, what the language is, what the kind of the focus is. And so this push for research translation really is a push to present an alternate versions of your scholarship. So again, whether it's a blog post, a book, an article, an op-ed, a tweet, an interview, some other ways to push that scholarship out. So a third is to incentivize social justice work across the academy. And as you know, in the wake of George Floyd's killing last year, universities across the country stated their commitment to social justice. And universities can establish ways to reward social justice work as measures, for example, as part of the evaluations for promotion and tenure, evaluations for renewal, contract renewal. So it could be looking at the types of courses that someone has developed and offered, symposia people have put together, creating a common reads program, picking books or a book related to social justice, making grant funding available, creating a university level award for social justice scholarship and teaching. So it seems to me, and what I'm pointing out here, so the first two were steps in terms of pushing forward on social justice work that individual scholars can engage in, but there's also institutional work that has to happen to complement that work, to amplify that work, to signal that the work is important. And so those are some university-wide things that can be done. Also creating opportunities for cross-disciplinary science collaborations. And so here an example would be a social science, excuse me, a social science lab, um, a workspace with members across disciplines. And excuse me just one second here, creating, so social science labs, workspaces that are created across disciplines where people are meeting and working together and finding out what the recent findings are in other places, around campus. And so I want to wrap up, but the fifth was critiquing our disciplines. We have to be willing to critique current and historical approaches and be willing to design and insist on new paradigms in our disciplines. Part of that part of that critique is a critique of the university itself. I encourage you to take a look at Professor Sandy Grand's article called Refusing the University, which basically asks whether the university itself can be a site for transformational or transformative social change, considering that the university is an arm of the state and an institution that has, over centuries defended and benefited from various forms of oppression, including genocide and slavery and other forms of racial and ethnic erasure. But so this idea of, is the university reformable? Is the university the space, or do alternate spaces need to be created to do meaningful social justice work? Then the last is, in terms of shaping the future of social justice, is being social. So you have to fill in what that next part is: being social, being a social scientist, being social, but doing social science work in what I would say out loud. Okay. One of my longstanding concerns about criminology has been its increasing move towards statistical modeling and less toward criminologists who gather, sift through, collect data by meeting and talking to people like Studs Terkel, or like W.B. Du Bois's work with the Philadelphia Negro, going door to door, interviewing thousands of people about their family and work structures. Okay. So I'll close by underscoring the value of our work as social scientists, as memory makers, and as memory keepers. Nelson Mandela, former president of South Africa, anti-apartheid activist and 27-year political prisoner, offers an incisive take on the role of memory in securing a just society. Okay. And this is Nelson Mandela on remembering and history. In the heart of any individual, family, community, or society, memory is of fundamental importance. It is the fabric of identity. At the heart of every oppressive tool developed by the apartheid regime was a determination to control, distort, weaken, even erase people's memories. The struggle against apartheid can be typified as the pitting of remembering against forgetting. Thank you very much. So, Jenna or Carrie, do you want to let me know if there are questions or comments? Just let me know how we can best do this.
Okay. If you'd like, I can read the questions for you,
Sure.
or all right. So the first question is, in your opinion, what are the biggest challenges or obstacles to improving justice literacy in the US?
I think it's K through 12 education. I think we need to engage with race more fundamentally more consistently across the educational landscape. Look, some schools don't even want to acknowledge Black History Month. So I'm talking about the places where people are willing to dig in and do this work. Everyone's not going to be on board, but I think the biggest thing is that by not addressing it in, this fertile time period, this, K through 12 period, it makes the work so much harder to do when you're now asking adults to rethink everything they've learned about the creation, the development of our society. So I think that's one of the roadblocks. Great question.
Okay, thank you. The next question is for those who would like, oh wait, okay. For those who would like to learn more about the relationship between race and crime and social justice work, do you have any recommendations for scholars or resources that we can look into?
So this is the question about suggestions. Well, I guess so. You said scholars. So, oh my gosh, there's so much good scholarship out there. I'm not sure if the question is really about academic scholarship as opposed to more mainstream, but there are so many people now who are writing about racial justice as their focal point for social justice, and are actually doing, community work. And I think of, most, one of the people doing it and doing it well is Brian Stevenson, who runs the Equal Justice Initiative as a death row defense counsel. Some of you may have seen the movie based on his work, Just Mercy, and he has a book by the same name. But there are many scholars who are writing about racial justice and are doing work on racial justice, and practitioners.
Have you used the term white crime outside of your published work? What have been the responses to the term in your published work and presentations among colleagues, etc.?
So, okay. Yeah, so I have used it. I use it when I teach my race and crime classes. Students are, reading about it as well. Yeah, early on, I got, okay, so let me give you an example. So, after I'd written the paper, before I, was able to write a book, had an opportunity to write a book on it. So I was on a panel at an American Society of Criminology conference. And this is one of the largest criminology gatherings in the world. It's an annual conference. And so I was on this panel. And so the title of my paper was White Crime. And so, 3 or 4 people on the panel. And so the moderator, is introducing us. And then so he says, oh, here's, Katheryn Russell. And her paper is White Collar Crime. And then he goes on. And so when it was my turn to talk, I pointed out how hard and how kind of alien in some ways just the formulation of white crime is, such that the moderator added a word to the paper title. It's like, this must be some mistake, right? This can't be possibly what the subject area is. So yes. So early on, I wouldn't say I got pushback. I mean, the pushback came in the form of, as I mentioned, the responses to the submissions that were made. I mean, people seem just, like I said, on a range of like quizzical, like, how would this be an important topic to? This is not important. But so, yeah, I haven't, there hasn't been much pushback, but there's just, there are more, increasingly, as the years pass, more people making reference to or using the term white crime. Thanks for the question.
The next question is it a good idea to specify and encourage the use of terms like white crime and Black crime, Or is there a way authors can use a more nuanced way of describing these crimes? Is it better to use more nuanced terminology?
I wish I could talk to the person directly because I would ask, what would that look like? So would that be what, like, how would we categorize crimes? And I've had this question come up in classes, like, and it's actually a question I ask students to consider, like, do we need these terms? Is there some other way that we can talk about crime? But kind of in the same way we gather data for the census, we want to know what's going on so we can figure out what to do about it, right? But my, my thinking is that if we are labeling some groups uh, by, some racial groups by crime, then we also need to do the same for other groups. And I know that part of the label Black on Black crime came about at a time, it's like the mid 70s, 80s, when there were concerns about rising amounts of crime involving Black victims and Black offenders. So, we have, reasons for labels at different points. But I think the concern is if we don't label all groups, then we are saying that there's something about Blackness that is tied to criminality. And so we kind of have an ellipsis after that. And that ellipsis can lead for some people to think, oh, it must be something genetic. It must be something biological. So I think that there's nothing wrong with using the racial labels. And I don't know another way we would do that because because race is so part of the fundamental undergirding of this country that even if we didn't label it according to, as we're talking about now, Black crime, white crime, people would do it by neighborhoods, and that the neighborhoods would signal certain things, right? We already have terms like, urban areas, what is, what do those terms mean? So race would resurface in another way. Thank you.
The next question is, how is your PhD training and JD training complementary? For undergraduate students considering law school and/or graduate school, what are the benefits of pursuing both degrees?
Not saving money. Saving money is not one of those. So, okay. Yeah, I had zero plans to go back to school after getting my law degree. Like that just wasn't even, a thing that I was thinking about. I do meet students now who are in JD PhD programs. Like that's part of the plan. I think, I know for me, when I was in school, either, grad school, law school, I wasn't 100% sure what I was going to do. I had some kind of vague general idea. But I think for someone who, I mean, certainly having those two degrees are great because most people don't have both degrees. But I think that you really can determine, I mean, if you're interested in doing work on policy, if you're legal policy, if you're interested in doing work related to, actual, getting in the weeds research. I mean, I think you can do a lot really with either of the degrees, but, with having a firm base in both law and social science, it is, I think particularly, I think it's a strong combination. Thank you.
Next question. You mentioned your observation or concern about the trend in criminology towards statistic modeling. While recognizing the benefits of that approach, what do you think is lost with the focus on that approach?
Well, I think the concern is that the people who are being investigated are the people who are doing the investigating, the people who are doing the numbers crunching are not actually talking, seeing, interacting with, like there's not this nexus between researcher and research subject. And I think there's there's a lot that's lost by that. I think certainly we've become quite sophisticated in what we can figure out and what we can determine, and by what power and all of that. But I do think in terms of kind of the sociology aspects of criminology, it's about being out with people. That's why I said kind of at the end there, the being social, the getting hearing directly from people and drawing that out in the findings. So I do think the humanity piece of it is very easy to report about large groups of people who people have, don't know them, don't, just don't have anything beyond what they've said on a survey. And so that concerns me just kind of more generally, not just with criminology, but more generally. Thanks.
All right, the next question is, how should graduate students and early career professionals balance the need to churn out research and publish with the need and desire to engage in social justice work and share their research with non-academic audiences?
So first of all, thank you for the question. First of all, let me say it is really impressive to me what graduate students are required to do before they even graduate. I mean, so when I graduated in the early 1990s, you didn't have to have an article published already. Now it seems like, I mean, it's just incredible to me what students have published before they graduate. So, I mean, so I guess the most obvious way to address the concerns raised by the identified in the question are, so if you can pick a topic related to or that has some social justice element, and then that's what your dissertation is, or that's what your articles are on, that's a good mesh right there. But I think in some ways, many of you are probably already doing some kinds of research translation. So if you're tweeting about or commenting about, or posting on Facebook about, I mean, that's you're already doing it. If you're already kind of in, summarizing work that you are doing or others' work and sending it out. So I think some of this is, if we stop and think about it, it actually isn't as time consuming as we would think. I hope.
All right, we have a question about being a social science scholar. As a social science scholar, what advice would you give to young scholars who are just entering academia?
I wonder what the question is really getting at. Advice? Can you read it to me one more time? What advice? Is the question what advice I would give to a junior scholar? Was that the advice?
Correct. It was, what advice as a social science scholar would you give to young
Yeah.
scholars who are just entering academia?
Yeah, it really depends on kind of what you see your trajectory as. And even you may see it as one thing and it turns out to be something else, and that's fine. But I just find that in academia, everybody's got some rules. Like it's just like it's never been done like that before. It's never, and so I think some of that is, you have to figure out what's working in your department, what are the rules, and then you have to decide, am I going to follow all of these rules? And I think what happens is, especially, junior tenure track members are loath to push back against whatever the machine says because you just want to get tenure. And by the time you do, all your fight is pretty much taken out of you because you've been year after year after year after year kind of doing what you've been told. I don't know if the person asking the question was concerned about kind of, subverting the dominant paradigm on how things are done in academia. But I do say, do the work that you think is important and that you think you can have or build an audience for. As I mentioned in talking about the white crime piece, and then, getting to write a book about it, And then, one of my colleagues saying it's not going to count, for anything more than an article. And I was like, first of all, that's ridiculous, right? How is a book not counting for more than an art? Like the comments felt to me as discouragement, right? And, it was like, I'm going to write this because I have stuff I want to say. I tried to do the journal route. That didn't work. And, different from law reviews, right? With the social science journals, you've got to go through the peer review process. And that's gotten quicker over the years, but it used to be months and months before you would hear back. And you could only send out one at a time. And so then, after that second round, a year's gone by. I mean, it's so my advice is to figure out a topic area, get to know the other people who are writing in your area across the country, across the world, and just keep writing. Just keep writing. Work on your writing, because writing, as you know, is hard work. If you've written a dissertation, you're a writer. And just find your niche and keep moving forward. But especially if you work at the margins, if you work on areas that aren't mainstream, find your people and get your support there, because you may not get it in your department, but keep going. That's my advice.
The last question is, you mentioned discouragement in the process. How did you keep yourself motivated when you were receiving pushback on your ideas?
Well, different things. I was I'd been out of school. I had some. I was a little. I was a little bit older as a graduate student. So I had, I'd been working, and so I had a little bit of a, I had some, a few years under my belt where I hadn't been in school. In terms of, you have to figure out how you're going to keep yourself keep yourself motivated and going, because you're just going to hear no a lot, or that's not going to work, or redo this. So I just, I had faith in what I was interested in doing. And just keep, listen to whatever music inspires you. Yeah, which I, would do out on my, runs and stuff. Yeah, you have to just find this support. And now what's so great about social media is there's so many different ways to connect with people that you may never meet, or will meet, when we resume annual conferences in person again. But yeah, just keep pushing forward.
All right, well, Dr. Russel-Brown, it looks like that was our last question. I'd like to thank you for agreeing to participate today. And I'd also like to thank, again, the student government at University of Florida and our executive committee at the Florida Society of Social Sciences. And I'd like to thank Beth Head as well for our technical support during this event. I did put up the link for the conference. So if anyone wants to look at all the great research that was submitted for the conference, that will be available. Also on the page next week, you'll have the video of the conference speakers that will be available there as well. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate that we got this done. This is our first annual conference that's been held online. So thank you to everyone that made it happen. And I, again, thank you, Dr. Russel-Brown, for all the great information, and take care.
Thank you very much.